Welcome to this side event on leaving no one behind, using a multidimensional approach to eradicate poverty and monitor SDG progress at the national level. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, Your Excellency Ms. Gloria Alonso, Minister of National Planning from Colombia, Ambassador Mr. Modest Mero, UN Permanent Representative of Tanzania, who is on his way, Ms. Sanyukta Samadar, Government Advisor at the National Institution of Transforming India, Mr. Riaz Fatiana, Convener of the National SDG Parliamentary Task Force and Chairman of the Standing Committee on Human Rights and Law in Pakistan, Prof. James Foster, Chair Oliver T. Carr, Jr. from George Washington University, and last but not least, my co-host and accomplice for this event and for many, many other intellectual endeavor, Prof. Sabina Alkire, Director of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, better known as OPHI. So, friends, welcome to this event co-hosted by UNDP and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative on using a multidimensional approach to eradicate poverty and monitor SDG progress at the national level. As we know, poverty is complex and multifaceted. While income-based measures are useful, and we're doing it since early 1990s, UNDP has attempted to measure what matters most for poverty, for people to live fulfilled lives beyond just incomes. Yesterday, UNDP and OPHI launched the new figures for the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, known as MPI. And you must have seen the report. If you don't have copies, we have extra copies that will be given to you during the discussion or when we finish. The data that you will see in the report, and we showed yesterday, show that 1.3 billion people in the world are multidimensionally poor, about 500 million more than the number of income poor. But if you follow the figures, you would see that we have done a lot of progress in poverty eradication. Our baseline in 1990 was that the world was home to 36% of poverty, income-wise, and today we have traveled a long way. The rate is 8%. It's something that we have to celebrate. But when you look at it from a multidimensional angle, we have reason to worry. The ratio is about 17%. So there is work still to be done. With more than 2/3 of the people in multidimensional poverty living in middle-income countries and not in low-income countries, it no longer makes sense to describe countries as simply rich or poor, and poverty is anatomically everywhere. The adoption of a multidimensional approach in the measurement of poverty allows to obtain a more comprehensive picture of those who are living in poverty and where they are located. To further support countries, UNDP and OPHI are launching today a handbook on how to build a National Multidimensional Poverty Index, MPI, to develop a more holistic understanding of what poverty means in national and subnational contexts. And this is the report that we'll be launching today, and you'll be having your copies. And I pledge here, that although it is in English, we're going to translate them in French, in Arabic, in Spanish, and other UN languages. So be with us. This approach can broaden national and local ownership to eradicate poverty in all its forms and to address the deprivation that leave people behind. National MPIs can be a useful tool to monitor progress on the SDGs, and it can be used for different policy purposes. For instance, to align programs, policies, and budgets to motivate the coordination between ministry, the coordination between national and subnational government, or to strengthen transparency and accountability. National MPIs can help identify who is living in poverty by revealing pockets of overlapping disparities within and across groups in different parts of a country, and how these deprivations change over time. Currently, several countries are developing national MPIs, which are adopted to reflect their own specific poverty priorities and national contexts. The governments of Colombia, Mexico, Bhutan, Chile, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Honduras, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Africa, Ecuador, Pakistan, Armenia, Mozambique, Panama, Nepal, Dominican Republic, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, the Philippines, and Afghanistan, among others, have implemented and included national adapted multidimensional measures of poverty in their long-term social development strategies. While even the city of Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam and the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil and Andhra Pradesh in India have done so at the local level. In Mexico, the national MPI is an important policy tool. For example, a campaign against hunger was launched in 2013, and the national MPI helped to define hunger based on the national MPI deprivations and to coordinate efforts from different ministries to tackle those deprivations and to assess progress. In Honduras, a multidimensional approach has helped the country to produce a resourceful, unique registry of beneficiaries. This registry has been helpful, targeting individuals and households with simultaneous deprivations, so social programs can reach those who need them the most. Authorities in Honduras can monitor progress for a set of indicators almost in real time. This is quite fascinating. An interesting example of the multiple applications that an MPI can have is the Vulnerability to Climate Hazard Index in the Dominican Republic. The index was developed within the framework of the National Program for Poverty Eradications. Its objective has been to integrate the variables of poverty, environment, and climate change to reduce the vulnerability of households. Today, we will hear valuable experience from 4 countries. UNDP is honored to have partnered with so many of you in your development of national MPI measures, including MPIs from Tanzania to Pakistan. It is very clear that with better measurements tools that feed into more effective and efficient poverty reduction policies, we can help ensure that no one is left behind. Let me now turn to my first panelist, Ms. Sanyukta Samada, Specialist Government Advisor on the Sustainable Development Goals at the National Institution of Transformation, India, called NETI. According to estimates released by UNDP and OPHI for the global MPI, which you have seen yesterday, India is a true success story. In 10 years, India has nearly halved its number of MPI poor. This is a massive gain. This means more than 270 million people out of poverty. This is clearly a moment for celebration. But let's hear more from Ms. Samada on what has been learned, the challenges and opportunity ahead. So Samada, like my other panelists, I will give you 6 minutes to give us the snippet of your philosophy. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. A very good morning, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So as Chair remarked, I give you the India story. So India, as you know, houses 1/6 of world's humanity, and therefore we believe that India's success holds a key to the world achieving the Agenda 2030, at the heart of which lies ending poverty in all its dimensions everywhere. So as has been rightly pointed, the traditional concept of defining poverty had been more on the economic criteria, but the world has moved on and so have the levels of deprivation. So we believe now that defining poverty merely in its economic terms gives a very narrow and restricted view, and therefore India has adopted the strategy of defining poverty in its multiple variations of social, cultural, political, economic, and also in terms of the impact of poverty towards in view of the resilience and environmental factors. Having said so, I would first like to congratulate OPHI and UNDP for spearheading this movement towards shift and redefining the entire concept of poverty in its multiple dimensions, which has become actually a mirror for all developing countries to address their problems of poverty and to address the core principle of leaving no one behind. India has been following a very comprehensive strategy for dealing with poverty, and that has 3 primary aspects. The first is providing basic amenities, which is in terms of massive large-scale developmental programs addressing the entire country for 1.3 billion of its population in terms of providing housing, drinking water, sanitation, cooking gas, roads, and food. Apart from this entire programs of providing basic deliveries, basic services and basic amenities, the second aspect of the poverty eradication and the poverty combating program has been social protection. So social protection programs of Government of India have been extremely upscaled, and I could give you a few examples. So we, in the last 3 years, we launched the world's largest national health protection scheme, which is also called the Ayushman Bharat, which targets 500 million population in terms of 50 million households, and provides an insurance coverage, a comprehensive medical insurance coverage. As we all know, health and problems of health, these are some of the most critical factors which are the impediments to sustain poverty escapes. So we have families which are pulled up out of the poverty line, but they fall back into poverty because of the problems of medical emergencies. Social protection systems like old age pension systems, the health protection systems, these are primary implements of ensuring that sustaining the poverty escapes in the country. However, no country can succeed in terms of improving the raising families out of poverty unless there is a large-scale and comprehensive skilling, employment, and employment generation and program. So some of the biggest programs that India has in terms of guaranteeing employment, like the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is a legislative framework for ensuring employment to the rural poor. Then a variety of skilling programs in terms of Prime Minister's Kaushal Vikas Yojana. These are various skilling programs in different sectors. Apart from that, what is also has been done to dovetail the skilling with generating employment is a scheme of credit, easy credit and micro credit for the startups, for self-employment enterprises, for small and micro enterprises. So this entire basket of programs, which covers the basic amenities, social protection systems, skilling and employment, and financial inclusion, I believe this multi-pronged strategy of Government of India, along with all the states, has been a key to achieving the results which Mar just mentioned, in terms of the fact that in the last 10 years, the impact of multidimensional poverty has actually halved, the incidence has halved, and 271 million people. And let me tell you, from the bottom 40% of the population have been moved out of the poverty. Now, just to sustain these programs and to sustain the continuous focus, we have developed a very robust monitoring and reviewing system in terms of the SDG India Index and a national SDG dashboard, by which we capture the disaggregated data up to the level of districts and villages, and disaggregated at the granular level by the different vulnerable sections of society and the sections living at the base of the pyramid. So when we have a proper statistical system, I do not say that it is absolutely foolproof, and we do need to develop a more robust systems in terms of getting more granular data, but at a higher frequency level. So this is some of the challenges in terms of having a more frequent periodic data at a granular level, disaggregated by different communities. So this is one of the areas where I would request OPHI and UNDP to partner and develop some kind of a peer learning mechanism in trying to understand how the global MPIs and the national level MPIs can rely on reliable, frequent, and disaggregated data systems which do not have a span of, say, more than 3 years, should be at least, once in 2 years. So this kind of data systems, this kind of indicators would actually help in giving a mid-course policy correction, and also a mirror in terms of how effective we are in our combat against poverty. I would also like to place on record my appreciation for certain states in India, like Maharashtra, like Andhra Pradesh, which have gone ahead and developed their own state-level MPIs. And this is a way in which this country is progressing, and we are now thinking in terms of collaborating to supplement the socio-economic caste census that we have already in place in India, which takes into account 14 points of deprivation in analyzing poverty, and to move towards the MPI in terms of different states and the entire country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanyuka. I'll go now to Mr. Riaz. As you know, Pakistan released in 2016 for the first time its MPI estimates, which are homed in their Vision 2025. It's a country that is addressing poverty reduction, having on its horizon a long-term vision. So, Mr. Riaz, in 6 minutes, would you share with us your experience?
Thank you, Mr. Dalai. I'm also grateful to UNDP who invited me and gave me a chance to speak few words. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. Let me first, I really am grateful to UNDP and OPHI who organized this event. Pakistan adopted MPI as an official poverty index along with National Income Poverty Program in 2016. We produced our first national MPI report in 2016 through a partnership between the Planning Commission of Pakistan, UNDP, and the Oxford Policy and Human Development Initiative, OPHI. Since then, we have made extensive use of MPI in the following ways. First, we have used MPI for targeting districts which are backward. In our recent budget, especially our governments provided maximum funding to those districts who were behind the others. Secondly, we have used multidimensional poverty as a tool to inform poverty and social protection programs. We have recently launched a $1.2 billion Poverty Alleviation Fund program. The entire focus of this program is to reduce multidimensional poverty. Thirdly, we are using multidimensional poverty as a benchmark to assess our progress and achievements. Our national SDG framework has yet specific targets for reducing multidimensional poverty. Similarly, the provinces have used multi-dimension for provincial policies and plans as well, because Pakistan is a federation, so there are 4 big provinces, and every province has competent to spend their money, and they are also planned accordingly. I would like to say that Pakistan is one of those countries who adopted a multidimensional approach to poverty measurement and targeting the use of MPI for such purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have hands-on experience in the use of MPI, I would now like to share a few thoughts for those countries who may like to use multidimensional poverty for their policy discourse. First, MPI is more useful for targeting if it could provide as much sub-national and national estimates as possible. We have noticed that sub-national estimates, especially district and provincial estimates, are very important to identify regions with required more attention of the government. Secondly, it's advisable to use data set which could provide context-specific information. In our case, we used the Pakistan Standards of Living Measurement Survey rather than DHS, as the former could provide sub-national estimates. Third, the choice of indicators is also important. We used the indicators which were more urgent in our case. And lastly, it's important to create wider ownership for the methodology and indicators to be used for construction the Multidimensional Poverty Index. We carried out a national consultation process engaging provinces to decide on the list of indicators to be used for the Multidimensional Poverty Index. We spent at most a year on consultative process, but we thought that political ownership is as important as technical soundness for the official use of MPI. Moving forward, we hope to update the multidimensional poverty estimates next year when the new household data will be available. Ladies and gentlemen, let me reiterate that poverty is a multi-faced phenomenon therefore multidimensional poverty estimates capture the multiple aspects of poverty and hence presents a more comprehensive picture. At the end, I would like to thank once again. Here, at present, new government came in force from August 2018, and our Prime Minister spoke in his first speech that we are going to eradicate poverty through human development. So we announced a welfare program first time, where widows, orphans, old age people and unemployed people are being beneficiaries from this fund. Secondly, we also provided a big fund for youth empowerment, youth employment and youth capacity building of youth. Thirdly, we also giving maximum support to women to start their own businesses. So I think our constitution is also provided guarantees from Article 8 to 40. The state is responsible to provide shelter, education, health care, and special kind of funds for unemployed and too much poor people. So I hope we will be able to reduce hunger and poverty in due course. Thank you again.
Thank you, Riaz. And these are two great perspectives from India and Pakistan. But I'm sure most of you have been following the curve of poverty reduction over time since we launched the MDGs and the Millennium Declaration. You would see that it's going steeply down, but it's kind of asymptoting around 5 to 8%. But we cannot satisfy ourselves with that kind of asymptote. We have to break the line and go below the asymptote. And Colombia is a country that have been using the principle of acceleration to go beyond that asymptote. And they have done a phenomenal job. And I would like to ask you, Ms. Alfonso, to share your story of acceleration. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the invitation. Yes, Colombia has been having a long history about the designing of multidimensional indices. Since the 90s, the country developed its own multidimensional indices, such as the Living Conditions Index. However, these measures exhibited some limitations for poverty measurements. These limitations, together with the need of a multidimensional poverty measure able to capture the actual living conditions in Colombia and the effect of public policies on the reduction of poverty, motivated the Colombian National Planning Department to design the MPI. As such, the UNDP, with support from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, designed a MPI customized to the country context and public policy priorities, which was launched and officially adopted as a complementary poverty measure in 2011. The Colombia MPI was designed with the aim to guide and track public policy. It combines 15 indicators grouped into 5 dimensions: household education conditions, childhood and youth conditions, labor, health, and access to household utilities and living conditions. I have like a presentation, but it's okay. The MPI Colombia assesses broader social and health-related aspects of poverty than the global MPI. It is important to note that the national MPI did not pretend to substitute the traditional income-based poverty measures, but rather to complement the existing measures, to provide information on the deprivations that people face at the same time, and better information for a more effective poverty reduction strategy. These measures have proven to be very useful for tracking multiple deprivations, to monitor public policies by sector, and to design poverty reduction goals. As such, in the recent National Development Plan, NDP 2018 through 2022, that was approved by the Congress, the MPI was included as one of the key indicators to track poverty reduction, and also it continues to be one of the most important tracking indicators of the monitor accomplishment related to SDG 1 and the SDG agenda. Therefore, the NDP set as a goal to reduce the population living in multidimensional poverty from 70% to 11.9%. It is almost 2.9 million people, which taken out from poverty by 2022. In setting this goal, it was also necessary to establish the contribution of each MPI indicator to overall MPI poverty reduction. This entailed linking each indicator to sectoral programs and interventions, and it also highlighted the need for a cross-sectorial coordination mechanism at the national level that provides guidance and ensures that all interventions meet the efforts required to achieve the overall MPI goal. In an effort for a better coordination of policies and poverty reduction programs, The National Development Plan established a high-level committee for policy reductions. We call it an equity roundtable, chaired by the President and comprising all the ministers involved in the National Poverty Reduction Strategy. One of the key objectives of this roundtable is to monitor the progress of the overall MPI and each of the MPI indicators to ensure that the targets are on track and the overall goal will be met by 2022. Moreover, starting 2020, MPI will be available at the subnational level as new data on households is being collected to update the existing information. From our tool to do that, we call it the SISBEN, our national database for targeting subsidies. This will be another important tool to track poverty goals and to assess the effectiveness of social programs. Last, I would like to congratulate this Oxford initiative for the excellent handbook that is being launched today. It will be very useful and very valuable to learn from other country experiences, and we also hope that some other countries can learn from our experience in designing and on the use of the measure to guide public policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Alfonso. This was truly enlightening, this Colombia experience on doing acceleration. Professor Fosso, we have heard 3 country examples, and I know that you have been one of those pioneers in getting the poverty matrix right. But I'll ask you a challenging question because you have been yesterday listening to Sabina, your co-pioneer, and Akim Steiner on these fantastic results of the MPI's adventure. Well, take stock first.
Oh, okay.
And then, in taking stock, I want you to give us a sense of direction for future research. How do we improve this fantastic tool that has been a powerful weapon in getting the policy to deal with poverty better? Over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I really thank the country representatives for their powerful examples of how poverty in their countries is being identified, measured, and removed. So what is this new handbook all about? It's a practical guide for countries to create their own well-grounded statistics, reflecting local values on what constitutes poverty. It's a step-by-step instruction booklet drawn from the experiences of peer countries, as recounted by OPHI and the UNDP, beginning with the dimensions of poverty, the priorities and weights on dimensions, and all the other elements of multidimensional poverty measurement, as Sabina will describe in just a second. It removes the substantial barriers to using this new and burgeoning measurement technique. Note that this is not your average mash-up approach to building multidimensional metrics, where dimensions are combined willy-nilly with little thought. No. Instead, it's a prime example of what I call intentional measurement, which entails careful planning to avoid pitfalls and intentionally confronting the difficult trade-offs inherent in the process. For example, there's the pitfall of uncontrolled updating, where the well-intentioned actor changes the measure frequently to include the latest improvements, but winds up with non-comparable data and doubts about its integrity. Rather, the schedule for updating should be clear and set forth from the beginning of the process and not on the fly. For example, a good rule of thumb is to update every 10 years. or consider the key trade-off between sophistication and clarity of a measure. One must be careful not to demand too much in one approach or one characteristic at the expense of the other. We believe the MPI is a good example of that balance. A clear headline statistic with desirable properties and sub-indices for policy analysis. The Handbook addresses these and many other issues. It is a guide to intentional measurement. Finally, I view the Handbook as a template for effective leadership. Earlier this year, a colleague at the Elliott School of International Affairs, where I teach, asked me to give a lecture in his course on leadership and strategy. The result was a lecture entitled Measurement as Leadership, which highlighted key examples, including Mexico's leadership in creating the first official multidimensional poverty measure, and noted how its use during the 2008 financial crisis contributed to good governance and communication. Yes, poverty rose at this time, but it was clear that the origin was financial and external. The good policies in other dimensions continued making progress all the while. Or the example of Colombia, who designed the entire development plan around its multidimensional poverty measure and encouraged collaboration and accountability across ministries to achieve a common goal. My students were enthralled by these examples. So this handbook is a guide to effective leadership, where you, the member countries and organizations, are on center stage. Those are my comments. Now, to address your question, clearly one of the main issues that we are all facing at home is inequality. Inequality has expanded in many places within countries. Across countries, it's a mixed bag. So how can we incorporate some of the ideas of inequality that go beyond the great presentation yesterday by Sabina, whereby inequality can be seen by focusing in on dimensions or on groups of people, so that you can see the differentials across those. Instead, it might be helpful to look at an overall index. And so Sabina and I have just written a paper called The Role of Inequality in Poverty, which extends the basic MPI and the headcount ratio to a measure that incorporates inequality within it. Now, it turns out that many of the results you will find empirically are similar to the base MPI measure. The MPI measure is still the main one. But you can capture the nuances that come from inequality as you move within the country and across the country. So that's how I would answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Friends, this moment reminds me 1990s. At that time, I was a very young economist, and I was fascinated when I listened to Amartya Sen and Mahbub Ullah, who came to UNDP to create the Human Development Index. That was a high moment. But this is a high moment too. It's my second high moment to see us designing a better way to measure poverty and to guide policy to deal with acceleration to bring down poverty out of the grooves of our constants. And Sabina, you have been not only a pioneer, but a priestess, I don't know how to say it in English, in prêtresse, in conceiving this very powerful weapon to guide policy making. I will leave it to you to inspire us again and tell us what do we do? How do we understand this very powerful weapon that we call the Handbook? And how do we land it on the hands of policymakers? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mar. I think the first thing I would like to recognize is that the Handbook, like all that we do, is very much a team effort. And our gratitude is to Serge Capto in this room, in UNDP Capto, for initiating this collaboration and really seeing how the work could go together. And to a joint team of UNDP and OPHI, including Adriana Conconi, Monica Pinilla, Ana Vaj, Corinne Mitchell, Gonzalo Hernandez Licona from our side, and others from UNDP. And our job was to listen to the emerging lessons that were coming from many countries and try to do something that would be genuinely useful. So to give a bit of a background, we had already written an academic book with James, with some postdocs. It's published as full text online, and it will put you to sleep if you have insomnia because of jet lag. It had lots of equations, it had lots of formalities, and it was useless for the practical purpose of building an MPI that actually is also a political process. It requires passion and leadership. And so the Handbook came out of the recognition that we need a different kind of a tool to put in the hands of the people who can actually do the job and use, as Mar said, the weapon of fighting poverty. So it was 2 years in the making, lots of conversations, and it's a team effort. So our primary purpose was to enable a South-South network to learn one from another of how to develop an MPI so that it doesn't sit on the steps of a statistical office, but it actually, as Pali Lahola, former Chief Statistician General of South Africa, said, breaks down the barriers with politicians. He said earlier statisticians had lobbed their statistics over the wall, but now we need to break down the wall and talk with the policy actors when we design statistics. So it meets their purposes. It meets Colombia's 2018 to 2022 national development priorities front and center. And the second is we needed evidence of how other countries had used it, because it is inspiring and it's informative, and others can learn, whether it's from Colombia that launched in 2011, from Pakistan in 2016, from states in India, and from the evidence of India's work using the global MPI. So that was our goal, was to have a tool and to have some stories. So our aim was not only to give a book for the young people who know Stata in computers who will work on the data sets, but we needed to give something to them in the statistical offices, but also to whoever is committed in the government, and you don't have to be high level, but somebody who's passionate about poverty, to figure out the kind of process, who to involve, how to drive it forward in the political side, and then also stakeholders, academics, civil society, private sector, UN agencies, and other groups that also, in a sense, share this objective of fighting the suffering that affect many. So the purpose of the book, we've already said, was to talk about the processes of building consensus and building momentum for fighting poverty using the MPI on the one hand, and then to talk about the process of developing a rigorous, tailor-made national MPI on the other, so that the technical process and the policy process walked together hand in hand and had, as Riaz Fatiana said, the ownership of the community, although that takes a lot of consultation. So the book has 3 sections, and each is self-contained, so it's not like you have to read it from cover to cover. You can really open it to the section that you're interested in. Section 1 is about the process. So we say, why would you want to build a multidimensional poverty measure to complement a monetary poverty measure? What are the reasons countries have found, not in academic terms, but really in terms of action? The second is, who needs to be part of this process? Who needs to own the final product? And so when, for example, Seychelles launched its MPI, pilot MPI, we had the president, we had the statistical office, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Family and Social Affairs, and many others present and understanding the process. And then was one communicate not just within government, but outside to the press, the media, the young people, the students, so that everyone understands and can be part of the national project. And then we have country examples. For example, in Chile, how they developed it building on an existing study from a foundation for overcoming poverty. We have the case of Costa Rica, where the private sector took a leading role together with the government in developing and later using the MPI, so it's used by government policy and by businesses to fight poverty among their own employees. And in El Salvador, where in a UNDP-supported study, they went to the grassroots, talked with the protagonists of poverty, learned from their experiences, and designed an MPI that matched those. And then the second part is technical, and it's for your geeks. And so we won't go through that very much, but it has each of the steps that they need to do, hopefully in a simple enough language, so that they can interpret and really understand the statistic. So for example, in the handbook, something that may be of useful for everybody is that we look at the dimensions that the existing MPIs have. Every Latin American MPI, for example, has work. Afghanistan's MPI was launched too recent for the handbook, but it has a dimension of shocks and insecurity. And then we also look at each indicator. And because the MPIs bring together SDG indicators, we list each indicator, the countries that use it, and the SDG indicator it refers to, so that we see how, in a sense, this is a tool for integrated multi-sectoral policies. And then we also, in a sense, see the data sources. South Africa built its data using a census, and Panama modified their survey to take into account new indicators, for example, on the digital divide. Dominican Republic did an entirely new survey, and Pakistan used an existing survey but with a new tool. So we try to give enough examples that you can locate your own context and work out of it. And then we also give some ideas of the many for data visualization. In Andhra Pradesh or Pakistan, maps were very key. In Vietnam, they disaggregated by ethnic groups. In Bhutan, again, they tracked whether their poorest districts had reduced poverty the fastest. Because visualizing the data so non-statisticians understand and are motivated by it is key. And then finally, and last but not least, we look at how it's being used, and you've heard the examples. In Colombia, of using it for targeting. In Pakistan, of using it for budget allocation, also in Colombia. And we draw on many countries, and really how it's being shaped to, with a given fiscal envelope, make those resources more effective tools for reducing poverty. So that's, in a sense, the handbook. I'm sorry to take so long, but our hope very much is that it will be useful, and also that you will know that this is a first edition. And as you innovate, as you improve our experiences, as you feed back into UNDP and OPHI, we would like to reflect your experiences and make this a tool that's a tool of conversation among a community of committed people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabina. Again, that was extremely fascinating. I just would like to reaffirm my pledge that we will be translating this fantastic weapon into all languages of the United Nations. And we'll be also working with OPHI to design an online course that you may use in academia and research and policy institutes. So this will be coming. We have some 20 minutes left to exchange from the floor before I come back to the panel. So as we are constructing the way we're going to use this weapon in dealing with poverty, so I will give the floor to you. If you have any kind of guidance, inspirations, comment, remarks, critiques, in an intellectual way over there.
Is the sound working? Okay. The question is about how you measure or include in the indexes, and maybe one of the countries that customized it did this, how you include shared factors of poverty. The example that comes to mind is roads. So it's not something that might be noticed in an individual survey of one particular household, but if a person has no access to roads and is in a remote area, that would increase their dimensions of poverty.
Let me keep taking a few. I see this co-construction, not only you asking questions to the panel, but maybe sharing your own perspective that we can absorb in going to the handbook 2.0. So feel free to let your creativity fly and guide us forward. Yes?
Thank you. I would like, first of all, to ask a question about comparability. It seems like this is a very good handbook, very good tool for building an index, an indicator set for what is relevant for you. And that's very important. But when we talk about SDGs, we need to be able to make comparisons, international comparisons, and when we talk about, and even if we go to the local level, so if every district, every county selects within a country its own relevant dimensions and different weights, so how can you make comparisons within a country between regions? How do you address this issue? And also, we have in several countries frameworks existing of well-being indicators. And these are, by definition, also multidimensional. So is there a little bit of a different focus when you talk about the MPI and well-being indicators? And maybe frameworks of well-being indicators can be used as a basis for selecting dimensions for MPI? Thank you.
Pakistan? Yeah. Yes, sir? Bangladesh.
Thank you very much for allowing me questioning. It's very fantastic in terms of measuring all dimensions of poverty with this MPI. My question is, World Bank is the big stakeholder actually. World Bank gave us the threshold figure of income to follow and measure poverty. So certainly UNDP deserves thanks for supporting estimation of this MPI. World Bank, how sees it, or whether World Bank can be attached with this kind of thing, because throughout the world actually follow the World Bank threshold figure for measuring poverty. How to tackle World Bank or to attach World Bank to this kind of efforts, if you don't mind. It's just to know, actually. Thank you.
I'll come back to Morocco. I want to make this interactive because we have a lot of technicalities ways around the index. Maybe I'll come back to you, Sabina and Prof, if you could feedback, and then I will go back to the panel. Sabina? Good questions.
Yes, very much. On roads and shared infrastructure, there are two ways. Bhutan's national MPI includes access to roads because that has been a big government priority, is bringing out farm roads and access roads. And so that data is taken from the household survey. It is also possible when the data are available through administrative or satellite georeferenced data to merge different data sets if they are accurate, but to merge a household as part of a community and to look at the access to a certain structure. But so far, all of the official national MPIs have drawn only on household surveys and the data in them. It's not for a technical reason, but because we could do it otherwise. But that's what's happened so far. I'll let James talk about comparability. In terms of well-being, Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index and Bhutan's national MPI both use the same methodology, accounting-based methodology. Bhutan's MPI has 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standard. Its well-being index adds 6 more domains. governance, environment and time use, community, culture, and psychological well-being. It also has higher deprivation thresholds in health and education and income and living standards. So it's possible, in a sense, to have well-being and poverty measures that speak to each other. And what's very interesting empirically in the case of Bhutan is that the least happy regions, multidimensionally, are not the same as the poorest regions. So a well-being measure brings in some of the community health and the psychological health in rural areas, although they are weaker in some other features. So it's quite interesting for a society to start a conversation on the mismatches between these two different angles of looking at it. Chile includes social cohesion in their national MPI, so there are other ways of expanding it in an MPI themselves. Finally, on the World Bank, I'll say something, and others may wish to add, including Mar, but our colleagues at the World Bank are also supporting national MPIs. Eswatini is here, and they've supported Eswatini, Nepal, Armenia, so they are also active in advancing national MPIs.
I'll come back to the bank questions a little bit later. Prof, could you come on comparability?
Sure, just to point out the obvious, which is that when you develop a measure, it has a specific purpose. And every purpose would naturally be subject to a different form of measurement. So if you have a country, you have a country measure, clearly. The global MPI is helpful for looking across countries. A regional MPI would be very useful for comparing neighbors. Even within countries, one could imagine villages having their own, and this is in fact being done. So I think that that's less of a detraction and more control and an attraction of the approach. To be sure, you'll still have to figure out what your purpose is, and that's always been the problem from the beginning. What is the purpose of measurement?
Thank you. Thank you very much. To come back on the very good question of the World Bank, remember in one of my preamble I said that I loved the moment of the SDG when it was created by Amartya Sen and Mahbub Ak. At the time, we have the supremacy of the economics and the GDP. And even the IMF at the time, when they come to a country doing Article 4 consultations, they use what they call at the time the PFP, the Policy Framework Papers, but basically macroeconomics. But after we launched the SDGs, they changed the approach and we came with the notion of the PRSP, Poverty Reduction Strategy Paper, which they shifted from macroeconomic-centric engagement with government to poverty one. That was the first moment. And in the second moment, we are seeing it. I would like to report here that in our engagement with the bank and the IMF, they are telling us that we are so embracing the SDG framework that we want now to talk about the SDG consensus, no more of the Bretton Woods consensus. And I would like to recognize that. And UNDP, the World Bank, and UNICEF are custodian on following up on some of the poverty reduction indicators. And that's a strong coalition. We haven't given enough credit to UNICEF. In fact, when we say that UNDP created the Human Development Index, it started with Richard Joly, who wrote that famous book on structural adjustment with human face. So we are again creating that chemistry between UNDP and UNICEF, and now the bank, and even the IMF engaging into it. To answer your question, there is a kind of coalition of the willing following this new moment that poverty is not purely economicist, it is multidimensional. So I would like to salute that. Let me go back to the panel and then, to the floor and come back to the panel. Morocco?
I have just, first I thank Al-Khair for this effort, this opportunity for humanity in general. And my question is how to balance between the needs to compare between countries, so to have standard measurements, and another dimension to take in consideration specificity of national and sub-national reality. It means that if we have just standard dimension, we must respect over time, or there is some margin to use when we want to compare, for example, the sub-national levels. In Morocco, for example, we want to elaborate index for each region or locality, etc. We have to respect the same standards in order to compare, or just to change in order to take in consideration the reality of local level. How balancing this challenge? Thank you.
Morocco, we'll come back to it, although also we have some national experience on the table that can complement what Sabina will say. But let me keep going to the floor. If not, since we have, yes?
Yeah, thank you. Christoph Lang from Swiss Foreign Affairs. I have to say I'm not a specialist on multidimensional poverty, but I've been dealing with SDGs for a while now, and I wonder how your effort, how this fills maybe gaps in measuring progress with SDGs, or in other words, don't you try by being multidimensional to sort of deal with all SDGs? I mean, it goes a bit into what my colleague said about roads, right? Are you in the end trying to measure everything? That would be my first question. And the second is, do you have anything on data? I mean, we hear constantly lack of data everywhere. Do you have anything in your handbook that helps with these gaps of good and reliable data? And then finally, what if anything, do you have for concerning poverty in rich countries such as mine? UK yesterday in the VNR also said there is a problem of poverty. We acknowledged this last year in our VNR. So do you have anything on the panel? We don't have, if I may say, representatives of rich countries, but we know it's also a problem in our countries, even though we don't speak of extreme poverty. Thank you very much.
Take two more and then come to the panel as time is running against us. Yes, here.
I am from UNDP Pakistan, and we have used the multidimensional poverty, so a couple of reflection on our experience. One, I think it would be very useful to have kind of a handbook for policymakers and for politicians to kind of explain to them that what, multidimensional poverty is. I remember when we produced the report for the first time, we were struggling with that because the income poverty is much easier to explain to, but this deprivation, and also perhaps that is one thing perhaps we should also consider. Second, and which is technical, and I know that's difficult, but if perhaps we can make an effort to kind of also come up with a threshold. I mean, I know this is a relative poverty as compared to an absolute poverty measure. But still, when we engage with the politicians of okay, what should be the acceptable level of multidimensional poverty, that is something perhaps, we struggle with. So just a couple of points. Thanks.
Last there, and then I'll come to the panel as time is locking us. Last two then. Over here and then on the...
Thank you, sir, for the floor. Rafael Hernandez from Mexico City and the state of Yucatan. And when we are talking about a multidimensional indicator, we use the Coneval measures, and it's a multidimensional. And we can compare to municipalities, states, and even to the countries. This MPA, we can use it for compare a local or subnational government. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, up there.
Does this work?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I serve on the UNICEF USA National Council, and I had a question regarding the online course that you guys said would be developed. Which stakeholders would be involved in developing the project? And you mentioned that it would be available to the public, but what specific contents would be developed during the course? Would it be policy-driven, and what kind of data would be going into the project, if any? Thank you.
Let me come now to the panel and then have 1 to 2 minutes, just snippets of reaction. Let me start with Sanyuka.
Thank you. There were a whole set of very relevant questions. I would like to address some of them. So there was one question, about how do we adapt this kind of a multidimensional poverty index or an SDG index from the national level to the subnational level and then going beyond to the local level? Well, I can talk from the experience of India. We have created not the multidimensional poverty index, but we have created the SDG India index, which is based on a set of indicators which cuts across all the 16 goals. And these indicators are created through a sense of, through a process of consensus building, not only with the subnational governments, but with also representatives from civil society, from community-based organizations, from organizations working in the different spheres of the SDGs. And on the basis of these consultations and consensus, we have tried to come up with a whole set of indicators which are commonly acceptable, which have comparable data at the level of at the granular level, at the level of the disaggregated communities. And so that's how I can say that we have been able to adapt the whole set of, the global indicators of the SDGs and bring it down to the level of the districts and the grassroots. That's one issue. The second issue is in terms of what the gentleman from there raised, in terms of why don't we move from a specific poverty index to an SDG index. Well, eradication of poverty in all its dimensions lies at the heart of the SDGs, no doubt about it. And the multidimensional poverty index has been built on a set of indicators which cover largely health, education, and living standards. But I would definitely say that the SDGs would be a lot more over-encompassing, including, indicators of roads and industry and credit and financial inclusion. So, well, countries are developing. So, we have developed the SDG India Index, and that takes care of that entire wide range of sectors and all the SDGs. But to have a focused study in terms of poverty and in terms of the dimensions of poverty, along with the figures and the data, I think that is very relevant in terms of developing the national strategy for combating the same dimensions of all the dimensions of poverty. Secondly, the issues of data have been there and they are there, and that is where to make the statistical systems more robust and to think of indicators devise indicators which would be comparable across nations, that is a challenge. And I think that is where UNDP and OPHI can play a greater role in terms of, because of the experience that you've had in different countries in terms of trying to find out a set of indicators which have better statistical systems and better data collection mechanisms. It is in this aspect I would also like to add the movement from relying on official data systems and administrative data systems which already exist in different countries, and to move from there in terms of using more and more technology and innovation-based platforms, online platforms, to collect parallel data systems, to develop a parallel data systems which would actually help us in more real-time monitoring and more effective monitoring.
Thank you, Tanyuka. Gloria?
Thank you very much. Maybe I would answer, but also I will ask some questions, especially here to the floor, to Sabina. Because, of course, at this point of, in the case of Colombia, that we have been really successful in terms of how well have been doing reducing poverty. The challenge is bigger every day, because at the subnational level we still have to build capacities to not just to reduce poverty, but also to get all of them involved, of the population involved in the SDGs, and how to get this reduction of the level of poverty in a good way. I mean, as a policymaker, you do not only take into account the statistics, but also the results. And I'm thinking about our challenge in terms of extreme poverty. Each time is more difficult because it's less people to attend, but these people is really far away from the cities. So it's not just a problem to the figures or to the methodology, but also it's a problem in terms of how to achieve, to continue reducing, as you mentioned, to accelerate more the reduction of level. So this is one of the moments where we are in Colombia. That's the reason why we create what we call this round table about equality. Because it is in that sense. It's not just to take into account the methodology, but also to use innovation, to use digital transformation in the country to achieve, to get the people, because you know, Colombia is at the tropical, we are in the Amazon area, so people is living there, and how to build the roads to connect the regions, to provide facilities in order to be successful to really reduce poverty. So it is an important challenge, and this is the situation today. So it also could be a good question to Sabina about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Gloria Arias.
Thank you. I think this is the time to eradicate poverty. We should develop human being. Secondly, without strong political will and wise leadership, you can't go forward. Thirdly, there is need capacity building of bureaucracy, and we should ask them that you should produce results. Politicians will decide and provide policy, and implementation will be from bureaucracy. And of course, we should also involve UN organizations and as well as civil society and academia especially to provide technical support and guideline. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. and Sabina, if you could give us your last words so that before I conclude. Professor Foster, yeah.
I'll just jump in and mention that the observation that the MPI could apply in a rich environment is dead on, and that is something underway in Spain right now and many parts of the world as well. And I have a particular soft spot for the country that we happen to be right next door. I think the US should be looking at this most enthusiastically at this point in particular because of the political realities and everything else. It's a great time. And I'll leave it to Sabina to capture some of the more technical and other questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Just very briefly, in terms of trying to measure everything, it's been interesting for us to be alongside governments and find that actually the other need is to really understand a measure. And if there are too many indicators, it's hard to communicate to journalists. It's hard to sustain attention, and people can't remember what the indicators are. So Mexico has 7 indicators, and Adriana, if I'm not incorrect, Panama with 17 is the most. And all the governments have between 7 and 17 indicators. So they have selected, and how they selected varies in different places, but that's what's coming out is the need also to have a focus, because the SDGs almost have too many indicators. In terms of data, the Handbook does mention some data sources, some suggested questionnaires that are relevant in some contexts. But what we do find is that every government does have some data sources, multi-topic, and they may want to improve them or refine them, but that those are updated, although, as Sunyaka said, getting more frequent data is a challenge in some places, but then Colombia updates their national MPI every single year. So it is a rhythm, Mexico every 2 years. In terms of Yucatan and Mexico, in the Mexico MPI, you can go to the municipality level and to the state level using the comparable measure of Mexico's multidimensional poverty measure. Using the global MPI, you cannot go down to the municipality level, but then you can compare Mexico to other countries. So those are the 2 different resources that you have, and they're quite different in the case because the global MPI measures very acute poverty, and Mexico's MPI, of course, is much more tailored to the context.
Thank you, Sabina. I think we can close now, and I think I have heard the spirit that came from this discussion, and I take it that you want us to understand that this shouldn't just be, the handbook shouldn't just be an inert document. beyond the handbook, we have to build also a heart book. But by that I mean the question I got from Pakistan, UNDP and UNICEF is that it's not just a book for practitioners as we know it in a narrow fashion. We have to engage with political leaders, as you said it, and then political messaging. And then how do we open up beyond academia to civil society and the citizens? So to make it a lively document. So this is, again, a pledge that we can here collectively make, that it won't remain a handbook, but it will be a hard book. But I will conclude by saying that wherever he is, Nelson Mandela is proud of us. You remember his famous saying that poverty is like apartheid and slavery. Is human-made, is an assault on our dignity, on our human dignity and our moral conscience. And we shouldn't satisfy ourselves by just reducing poverty. This has to go from our life, from our civilization. And I believe that having this weapon, and I really call it a weapon, on our a hand and heart weapon, we can deal with it. And I would like us to be part of this movement, and don't leave it only to OPHI and UNDP and the panel. And I see all this flow as a part of that movement to really eradicate poverty on the face of the earth. And thank you really for joining hands in this panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. We should be taking a picture of this panel.